So if we can start. So good evening, sir. We are three students from Malalati International School. My name is Shlok Mittal.
I'm
Um,
Soham Jain.
And I'm Ame Gupta.
we just had a few questions to ask you about your working life in general, and we would love to hear your responses.
Happy to answer. Shoot.
So one of the first questions we had, as the CEO of a large company, how do you maintain a work-life balance?
So that's always a tough challenge to maintain a work-life balance. But you know, one of the golden rules I've always learned is that work expands to fill time. So there's never a point of time your work gets over. So if you say I'm going to continue working, I can assure you that more and more work will come up, and that sort of just expands to fill the time that you have. So really, it's got to be around having some sense of discipline around saying that, listen, at some point of time, I've got to stop working. And it's important to do that because your life is not all about work. There's a family that's behind you, and that's largely also responsible for the success that you have finding in your corporate life. So it's essential to maintain that balance, to come home to a happy family, to ensure that you can devote time. You have some off time to recover from the stress of work. So it's a very important thing to have that kind of a balance. So I ensure that by having a discipline around what time to what time will I work. So there's an off time and then an on time. And that's extremely important.
Okay. And what challenges did you face while rising through the ranks?
Well, the path to success is certainly not paved with roses. It's, let's say, full of stones and thorns, and it's not the easiest. I came from a fairly ordinary background, I must say. To start with, I did not have the brightest educational background. Secondly, from a financial standpoint, I was not born into the lap of riches. I came from a very average, lower middle income class house. And therefore, it was incumbent upon me to make my first job was with ITC. I was a management trainee with them in their hotels division. And I must tell you, it was some of the toughest jobs that I've done. I used to work 17-hour shifts. I used to barely sleep for about 6 hours a day. I used to do 17-hour shifts and really work my butt off. It was absolutely important that I had to put in that kind of work. Of course, the usual challenges that anyone would face in the sense that you would have biases at workplace, you would have the usual politicking, you would have the usual challenges of competition. It's not normal that you would get promoted without having competition. So always at any given point of time, you would always, while being considered for promotion, be compared to the other peers that you have, the other colleagues that you have. And it was always important to stay ahead of people. From a challenge perspective, there were times, for instance, when I made my first shift of a job from hotel business to the aviation business, I had absolutely no background of what the aviation business was like. And that was a massive challenge because I had no knowledge to start with. And so I felt like I was thrown into the middle of sharks. And that really meant that I had to, literally double, triple, and even make it 10 times the pace at which I had to learn. So you've got to be on your toes constantly. You've got to make special efforts to make sure that you're always ahead of the game. So at every stage of life, there was a challenge.
So you said that you had no experience in the aviation industry at all. So what
Yeah, that's
made
right.
you change to the aviation industry?
So I think the really cool thing to say here would be that it was a well thought out strategy, but it was not a well thought out strategy. I was actually working in the hotel business. I was doing well. I at that point of time was the youngest food and beverage director in the company. I was recognized as a fast riser and an upcoming future leader, etc., etc. So I was in a good place. But at that point of time, Jet Airways was doing a bit of an experiment. They were trying to see if they could hire a few hotel industry professionals. Jet at that point of time, this was way back in 2003, was an extremely efficient airline, was known for its efficiency, but what they were missing was softer elements of hospitality. They were looking for some hotel industry professionals to come in and sort of bring that in, the hospitality angle. And they approached three of us from the ITC hotels business, and we were hired as a part of an experiment in the Jet Airways company. And this was driven by the chairman of Jet Airways himself. And I think us coming in, turned out to be a great success because they went on to hire many more. And when we came in first, initially, there was, of course, a certain amount of training that the company would provide. But I start
That's like,
from the scratch, really work my 12 board exams as hard as I did when I had to study for getting myself abreast of the aviation business. So really, it was a lot of effort, a lot of, and thankfully that by that time, internet was already available. You could Google, you could get information easily available at your fingertips, which was essential. And by nature, I'm a very curious person. Cannot ever stand the position that I've heard of something, but I don't know anything about it. So my innate nature would be to go and research a little bit more about it and learn a bit more about it. And that's the way I learned about the aviation business, bit by bit, but really on a consistent basis.
Moving on to the Bangalore International Airport, with it being one of the fastest growing airports in India, what steps have you taken to ensure the efficient running of the airport?
So as of year before last, we were the fastest growing airport in the world, not just in India. So it was really an extremely fast growing airport. And a fast growing airport brings with it its own huge challenges. The principal objective of an airport company is to make sure that you can add capacity in line with the growing needs of aviation in India. So airlines are the ones that bring in the growth. Airports are not the one that brings in the growth. So more and more airlines that launch flights, the airport must be capable of catering to that. So the principal objective of an airport is to ensure there's enough capacity from an infrastructure point to cater to airlines. And one of the new thoughts that believed in and that we propagated and practiced is the fact that expansion of capacity does not come through the traditional response of building more, pouring more concrete, or building through bricks. And we said that some of the expansion of capacity could also come from bytes. In other words, technology, something that all of you would be familiar with because you are all of the digital technology world. And we believe that existing infrastructure could deliver much more capacity by being more efficient, by producing more throughput. So I think a dual investment in technology and in by, of course, physically building capacity as well. If you go to Bangalore airport right now, you'll see that we're in the midst of a very large expansion program. So both together, physical capacity expansion as well as digital. So you imagine the terminal, as an example for you guys, imagine the terminal to be a box. The box has a certain throughput capability. If
sorry, your voice just broke
then,
for 5. We couldn't hear you.
So I'm going to reverse back for a few seconds. So what I was saying was, if you imagine the terminal to be a box, and the box has a throughput capacity, and every hour it could put through X number of people. And if you say now I could do 1.5X the number of people because of technology that I've used, per hour capability goes up, and therefore the annual capacity of the terminal goes up as well by just investing in technology that improves efficiency. So that's one of the thinking. That's some of the thinking that we've introduced in India. So we call it growth through bytes. So that's about expanding capacity. That apart, I think other than that is that you've got to through process re-engineering, through investment in technology, through investment in training of our people, there is constant effort that goes into making sure even the efficiency that the airport continues to remain on top. You spoke about the fact that how do you maintain efficiency and manage customer service despite the growth? And in the aviation business, the toughest challenge is there is about 60, 70 agencies that comes into play. So the various airlines that operate at airports, there are ground handlers, there are fueling companies, there are CIS. immigration, health authorities, there is parking attendants, there is trolley operators, there is, there are so many different agencies that come into play to make sure the airport functions efficiently. And orchestrating the effort of all these agencies put together is another very important task that we do. And we do that through a principle of collaborative decision making, which means that we make sure that airport decisions are not taken by the airport operator, but we do that in a collaborative fashion with all the stakeholders involved, which ensures the buy-in of all the stakeholders. And that's how we improve the efficiency on a consistent basis, even as we grow fast. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
And with the ongoing COVID-19 crisis, how are you taking steps to ensure maximum safety for your employees?
Good question. It's been the toughest challenge, and when I say our employees, you must distinguish two things. Bangalore International Airport Limited, the company, has only about 1,500 employees. But I'm not responsible for just 1,500 employees. I'm responsible also for all the employees in the entire airport ecosystem, which consists of about 28,000 people. So it's a very large number of people that we spoke to. So the rules of ensuring their safety are not different from what's being practiced in the rest of the country. So the main principles of early screening and detection. So every employee who comes in, gets screened, gets detected, et cetera, et cetera. Then, of course, ensuring that hygiene and sanitation are maintained to the highest standard. So we went through all the buildings. We have 60, 70 buildings in the campus. We went through each one of them, into the nooks, crannies, and got them completely thoroughly cleaned out. We experimented a lot. Now we've also established a separate research wing. The research wing is only continuously interacting with various academic institutions like you've heard of the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, which is the premier science institute in the country, the IIT Mumbai, John Hopkins University. So we interact with various academic institutions, various other research companies, and sit together and figure out what kind of latest technologies can we adapt to sort of keep our employees safe. For instance, we're finding new things like, for example, ozone misters. We're finding the use of quaternary ammonium chloride, etc. These are new things that are never used normally in airport operations, but these are the kind of chemicals that we're using to ensure that disinfection happens at a very high standard. Of course, you already heard of hydrogen peroxide and sodium hypochlorite that's being used a lot in the cleaning of various areas, and usage of these chemicals to ensure that sanitation is maintained to the highest standard. We've placed hand sanitizers in over 1,000 locations, 500 just in the terminal building, but apart from the terminal building, if you add all the other buildings put together, close to 1,000 locations, we've got hand sanitizers so that people can keep their hands clean. We've provided to the entire campus, we've provided them masks. We've provided them, for people who work in more sensitive areas, like the CISF, we've even provided the full body biosuits so that they can be completely safe. The people who are to frisk passengers. So a slew of measures to ensure that, so combination of three things essentially: personal protective equipment, hygiene and sanitation of the work area, and third will be early screening and detection.
So do you think there'll be any protective measures taken by flights after, if the flights start again, like domestic flights?
I hope it's not an if. It must open at some point of time, and it has to open. So I hope more than ever that it will start operating. But yes, it will. And I think, so both from a regulatory perspective, there will be a lot of pressure both on airports and airlines to make sure that we take a lot of measures to make sure we can commit and guarantee safe passage of passengers through airports and the aircraft without contracting this disease. And it's such an easily transmittable virus that the efforts that will have to be made are very special. You ask me, do we have all the answers? No, we don't have all the answers to what needs to be done to, especially the aircrafts where the seats get used over and over again. There are talks about whether middle seats should be kept vacant or not, and things like that. And from an airline perspective, it's not even feasible. So special measures will have to be taken to ensure that sanitation is done of the aircrafts and this is one, like I said, one from the regulatory perspective. but also from the airports and airlines. The airports and airlines are sort of vying with each other to then the other, and to ensure and guarantee that the safe passage of passengers through the airport terminal, as well as and the principal aim will be to guarantee to flyers that flying actually might be the safest form of travel that you have today in this country. You know how buses are in India today,
Yeah.
and how they are maintained. You know how trains are in India, how they are maintained. It's going to be impossible for considering travel on that without the risk of getting a coronavirus. So I feel like in the next few months, aviation might actually be the best and the most safest form of travel.
Absolutely.
So
Also,
how do you think? Go.
sorry. Did you agree with the government's decision to ban all domestic and international flights, or do you feel there could have been a slightly less stringent regulation?
No, I completely agree with the government's decision. This was absolutely required. A complete lockdown was effectively the only way to ensure that the only way to flatten the curve, as you probably heard of. Uh, and that was a need of the hour. Spread stops, and that could have been achieved only by preventing people from interacting with each other. Especially, I mean, let's face this. One thing about our country is that the levels of self-discipline, blessed with self-discipline. So in a case like this, it was extremely important to make sure that we enforced discipline around keeping people separate and not interacting with each other. And that could have been achieved only with the lockdown and only with the shutdown of flights. The other thing that's very crucial in this scenario was the fact that this disease was not really understood, and even today it's not fully understood. People talk about the fact that there are multiple strains, the virus is mutating as we speak, etc., and we're nowhere close to finding either a cure or any way to prevent this from spreading. So with that being the case, a lockdown and prevention of flying was also essential to buy us time to figure out what are the measures we need to take before we start operating again. Even today, like I said, despite the fact that we've had over 40 days to think about it and to constantly research and analyze it, we still don't have the solution as to exactly what would be the exact measures that need to be taken in order to guarantee safe flying. So this is really required to buy us the time to think through all these issues.
But don't you think that the ban on any sort of air travel is going to affect the Indian economy largely?
Absolutely. And I think, the question that we need to answer is, I mean, it's important to have the economy, but remember that today it's become first a question of survival. If you don't survive as a species, there is a book called Black Swan. Have you read or heard of this book called Black Swan? There's a
No.
author of it's a very famous book that speaks about the fact that there are events around that happen in the world which are completely unpredictable, and these events have a very large impact on everything else around us. And this event is arguably what is called a black swan event. And the author of that book and many other experts argue that if we do not control this, if we do not take any measures around this disease, there could be a possibility that this could literally wipe out a large part of the human population, right? And given that, I think the first priority is really to ensure that we survive as a species. Survival, once it's guaranteed, then we take the next steps towards economic recovery. And I think there has to be a balance. And I think the government of India has done that to a certain extent. I don't know whether you've noticed that in the latest lockdown, from the 21st of March, they have said that certain industries, especially in rural areas,
Yeah.
because in India, it's only in urban areas that you see coronavirus. Many parts still from coronavirus, and therefore have said that in many parts of rural India, certain defined kinds of economic activity can happen. For example, construction. For example, factories where the workers are also living in the same campus and do not mix with the external society, so they can go to work and come back. Things like that. Manufacturing and delivery of essential goods. All that is possible. So I think slowly and little by little, I think the government will open up pockets of the economy, and so that you can create the right balance between the very important requirement of lockdown, the important requirement of also keeping the economy chugging.
Okay. And as you said in your TED talk, airports are national monopolies. And we know that monopolies have no inclination to raise efficiency. So why did you take a step to increase efficiency regardless of this fact?
That's a brilliant question. And I actually start most of my talks by prefacing that. Airports being natural monopolies, the biggest risk of having monopolies is that service quality suffers and sometimes pricing goes through the roof. But India has been an exceptional case where airports have done, despite the fact that we have been monopolies. So even if I don't raise the efficiency of the airport, the fact is you have no option but to fly from Bangalore airport, right? There is no other airport that you can fly from. But despite that, we have done that. And I think that's come through because there is an innate belief, and this is truly something that only private enterprise can begin, only private enterprise can bring in. You would notice that this change in Indian airports were always monopolies. But when did this change, right? I think it's the privatization of airports that brought in private enterprise. And the thinking of private enterprise that changed this whole thing. So for instance, our thing, we don't have competition. So our aim is not to beat competition. Our aim is not to have larger market share and things like that, because that's taken for granted. So really, it is very important for businesses like us to make sure that we have a larger sense of purpose than just beating competition or having a larger market share or having more revenue than another organization. And what is that larger sense of purpose? I mean, the largest sense of purpose that we've identified, to which we connect our people, is number one, we talk to our employees to say, hey, listen, we have an opportunity to make sure that we change the image of our country, right? Airports are the calling cards or the face cards or the visiting cards of any city. And every visitor that comes into our country actually enters through an airport. And we have the opportunity, by providing exceptional service, to create the right impression, the impression that we've always wanted for our country. We always get embarrassed when people refer to us as a third world or a developing country. And I think we use the opportunity in airports to say that we're going to change that image by ensuring that we can deliver great service and providing a great first impression to people who enter our country. Second thing, airports are large drivers of the economy. We have huge, and what do I mean by that? We contribute large volumes of tax revenues to the government's exchequer. We contribute immensely to employment generation. I told you 20,000 employees in the airport. Expect the next 6 years to 45,000 employees. So immense employment generation potential. So we are an entity that makes a huge impact on the socio-economic development of region. Now, where the airport first was established was like a village. And today you've seen the development that has happened because of the airport. Let's say starting from Hebal, everything going towards the north, that area has developed immensely. You've seen the fancy new buildings coming up there, the terrific looking office complexes coming up there, the shopping facilities that are coming up there. And this will continue to extend all the way to north, reaching Devanahalli. And even in the Devanahalli region, all the villages around the airport have prospered immensely because of our establishment. So we believe that we connected to a larger purpose of nation building. We are connected to a larger purpose of socio-economic development of an entire region. And that's what drives us. That's what excites us. That the joy of seeing people coming into our country and say, we were in the United States of America like this. That is a truly world-class airport. The joy of seeing that, that's what excites us. That's what drives us.
So with tourism being one of the most affected sectors in the world, how will the Bangalore International Airport take steps to ensure that the tourism sector in India does not get impacted as much?
So, to be honest with you, tourism is a very large and complex subject in the sense that there are so many different agencies that play a role in order to ensure that tourism does well. And I don't think India does a good job of promoting tourism in any case. We have 7 or 8 million international tourists coming into our country, and that's nothing compared to even Sri Lanka, which has got international foreign tourists that the whole country of India gets. Malaysia has 4 or maybe 5 times the total number of foreign tourists that India gets. I mean, it's really a small amount. But having said that, I think the role of the airport in promoting tourism is by improving connectivity and keeping the airport open. So first step would be to keep the airport open, and that's something that we're working towards as quickly as possible, trying and reopening the airport. And number two, of course, would be to ensure that improve international connectivity. So for instance, just before the shutdown, this year alone, we added several new flights. We had announced the start of a new flight from Japan. We had announced the start of a new flight from Amsterdam, which is the KLM flight. We had announced the start of a new Lufthansa connection. The existing Lufthansa flight goes to Frankfurt, a new flight to Munich. We had launched this year a new flight to Addis Ababa, Ethiopian Airlines, and we had also announced the American Airlines direct flight to Seattle. These are efforts that the airports make to improve the connectivity. What happens is when you establish this connectivity, it's not just business travel that happens, but when you have a direct flight to any country, the tourism to that country automatically goes up. So we've seen that happening. So for example, the moment we've opened a direct flight to Japan, apart from the fact that it will facilitate Japanese businessmen from coming and going, a lot of Japanese who always had an interest in coming to India, but have never done that because, it's a painful way to travel. You've got to go through a hub. You've got to transfer to Singapore, have a 7-hour direct flight. Let me just fly to India and so experience the tourism of India. So that direct flight always has that impact. And the role of the airport really is in two things. One is to remain open and make sure enhance connectivity to various parts of the world.
Yeah. And have you seen an increase in flights with the introduction of the second runway?
The second, let's put it the other way around. The second runway was built because we saw a huge increase in flights coming up. That is the reason why it was built in the first place. Airport infrastructure is expensive. The construction of a runway can cost you something like 2,500 to 3,000 crores to fully build and operationalize a runway. You don't build that runway and then hope for traffic to come in, hope for new flights to come in. You build it when you're 100% sure there are more flights coming in. So we saw that coming in. We knew what the traffic projection was. As an airport, we interact with airlines, both in India and internationally, study what kind of plans they have for Bangalore, what kind of flights they plan to bring in. And only when we know for sure that the time is right to introduce a second runway do we build it. But unfortunately, in this case, of course, now with the COVID-19 situation, traffic is plummeted, and it will be some time before the second runway actually gets operationalized. But the fact of the matter is that ultimately, Bangalore will be a mega city and will need 2 runways, and flights will come for both the runways to operate simultaneously.
Can you just give us 2 lines and some advice you would give students like us who want to become entrepreneurs in the future? Just a short anything.
I think, what's happened in this world is that the number of opportunities for youngsters to start business is just so. For the only advice I'd like to give you youngsters is that, number one, be worldly wise. Be aware of what's happening around the world. Do not focus your attention only on the education that you have, but focus, read. I think that's absolutely critical. Read, be aware of what's happening around the world. And from an entrepreneurial standpoint, opportunities will constantly pop out at you. If you're somebody who's reading up, who's watching what's happening in the world, opportunities will pop out at you. And then, of course, experiment. Never be afraid to fail. That's very important. I think for youngsters like you, that would be another very important advice. Do not be afraid to fail. I wanted to start my entrepreneurial journey at the age of 40. And I soon realized that by the age of 40, I had already covered myself with such a blanket of security of the comfortable job that I had, the salaries that I've earned, etc., that I did not have the guts to step out into the entrepreneurial world, because the risks of doing something entrepreneurial and failing were far too high at the age of 40. At the age of 20, you can go out and fail 5 times. So go out and take the plunge and make every effort, because if you fail, it's not a failure of your life, it's only the failure of an experiment. So go out and take those chances.
Thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to help us understand what we have to do to succeed. Your story shows us that with hard work and discipline, we can overcome the obstacles that we face in our careers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. It was fun